Yes, ma'am. I studied all the problems, and I'm ready. Ms. Harper's lips twisted into a mocking smile. Is that so? Well, we'll see about that. Lena kept her head down, her heart pounding in her chest. She knew she had prepared, but Ms. Harper had a way of making her feel like no matter how hard she worked, she would never be good enough. The day of the test came, and the classroom was silent except for the sound of pencils scratching against paper. Lena moved through the questions methodically, solving each problem with care. She felt confident about her answers, but she couldn't shake the nagging feeling in the back of her mind that Ms. Harper would find some reason to fail her. When the test was over, Lena handed in her paper and waited. The next day, Ms. Harper handed back the graded tests, and Lena's heart sank when she saw the large red F scrawled across the top of her paper. She flipped through the pages, her eyes scanning the problems she had solved correctly. Each answer was marked wrong, even though Lena knew they were right. Her throat tightened, and she felt tears welling up in her eyes, but she wouldn't let them fall. Not here. Not in front of Ms. Harper. Lena, Ms. Harper called from the front of the room, her voice dripping with false concern. It seems you've had some trouble with this test. I expected more from you. Lena took a deep breath, forcing herself to stay calm. She raised her hand. Yes, Lena? Ms. Harper said, raising an eyebrow. I think there's been a mistake, Lena said quietly. I went through the problems, and I believe I got them right. Ms. Harper's eyes narrowed. Are you questioning my grading, Lena? Lena hesitated. I think if you look again, you'll see that I solved them correctly. The class was silent, every eye on Lena. Ms. Harper walked over to her desk, snatched the test from her hands, and flipped through the pages. She looked at Lena for a long, tense moment before tossing the paper back onto her desk. Maybe you should try a little harder next time, she said, her voice sharp. It's not my fault if you can't keep up. Lena felt a lump rise in her throat, but she swallowed it down. She wouldn't cry in front of the class. She wouldn't give Ms. Harper that satisfaction. But as the day wore on, the weight of it all, the constant belittling, the unfair treatment, the fear of never being good enough, became too much to bear. After school, Lena walked home in silence, her backpack feeling heavier than usual. When she arrived home, her father was in his office, busy with schoolwork. Lena paused outside the door, wondering if she should tell him about what had been happening. But then she thought about how much work he had, how much responsibility he carried as the principal, and she decided to keep it to herself. She didn't want to worry him. She would handle it on her own. Days passed, and the tension between Lena and Ms. Harper only grew worse. Ms. Harper continued to call Lena out in class, making snide remarks about her abilities and insinuating that she wasn't trying hard enough. Each time Lena answered a question, Ms. Harper found a way to criticize her, twisting her words or pointing out the smallest mistakes. One afternoon, the school held a special assembly to celebrate academic achievements. Students who had performed well in their studies were called to the stage to receive certificates of excellence. Lena had always excelled academically, but as the names were called, she sat quietly in her seat, her stomach churning with anxiety. She knew Ms. Harper wouldn't call her name, no matter how hard she had worked. Sure enough, as Ms. Harper stood at the podium, she called out the names of several students from their class, none of whom had performed as well as Lena. As each student walked up to receive their certificate, Lena felt a pit forming in her stomach. And finally, Ms. Harper said, her voice loud and clear, we have a special award to give. This student may not have the highest grades, but she certainly tries hard. Her eyes locked onto Lena's, a twisted smile on her face. Lena Davis, please come up. The words stung like a slap to the face. Lena froze in her seat, her heart pounding in her chest. The room seemed to grow smaller as every eye turned toward her. Ms. Harper's smile was triumphant, as if she had been waiting for this moment to humiliate Lena in front of the entire school. Lena's legs felt like they were made of lead as she slowly rose from her seat and walked to the stage. She could feel the heat of everyone's gaze on her, and the knot in her stomach tightened with every step. When she reached the stage, Ms. Harper handed her a certificate, one that wasn't for academic excellence, but for most improved. It was a backhanded compliment, meant to demean Lena's hard work, and Lena knew it. The words felt hollow and cruel, a public reminder that, In Ms. Harper's eyes, she would never be good enough. As Lena took the certificate, her hands trembling, Ms. Harper leaned in close enough for only her to hear. "Don't think I haven't noticed your little complaints," Ms. Harper whispered, her voice laced with venom. "You can try all you want, but you'll never be what you think you are. People like you just don't measure up." The words cut deep, deeper than any insult Lena had ever heard. She could feel tears pricking at the corners of her eyes, but she blinked them back, refusing to cry in front of the entire school. She wouldn't give Ms. Harper the satisfaction. But it was too much. The constant barrage of cruelty, the humiliation, the sense that no matter how hard she worked, it would never be enough. Lena couldn't take it anymore. Without thinking, she dropped the certificate and bolted off the stage, her feet pounding against the floor as she ran out of the auditorium, tears streaming down her face. The room fell silent, stunned by Lena's sudden exit. Ms. Harper stood frozen at the podium, her smile faltering as whispers filled the room. For a brief moment, she looked around, unsure of what to do. But then her expression hardened, and she turned back to the assembly as if nothing had happened. What Ms. Harper didn't realize was that sitting at the back of the auditorium, watching everything unfold, was Mr. Davis. Lena's father had been attending the assembly, his heart swelling with pride as he watched his students receive their awards. But when he saw the way Ms. Harper had humiliated his daughter, the pride in his chest quickly turned to rage. Mr. Davis stood up from his seat, his eyes burning with fury. He knew now that this had gone too far, and he wasn't going to let it continue. Lena had been suffering in silence for too long, and it was time to put an end to it. As he strode toward the stage, his heart pounded in his chest. He had always been a man of calm and patience, but no one was going to treat his daughter like that. Mr. Davis's footsteps echoed through the hall as he approached the stage. The weight of his authority as the school principal, but also as a father protecting his daughter, was palpable in his every stride. He had seen enough to know that what had been happening between Lena and Ms. Harper could no longer be ignored. As the assembly wrapped up, Ms. Harper prepared to leave the stage, a smug expression still lingering on her face. She believed she had won, that her petty display of power over Lena would remain unquestioned. But she was wrong. "Ms. Harper," Mr. Davis called out, his voice calm but firm. The room fell silent. Teachers and students alike turned their heads to see the tall figure of the principal standing at the foot of the stage, his hands clasped in front of him. Ms. Harper paused, turning slowly to face him. She looked momentarily startled, clearly not expecting to be addressed, but quickly composed herself. "Mr. Davis," she said, her voice attempting to maintain its usual controlled tone. "What can I do for you?" "I think we need to have a conversation in my office," Mr. Davis replied, his tone giving no room for argument. "Now." Ms. Harper's face blanched for a split second before she forced a smile. "Of course," she said, straightening her shoulders. "I'm happy to discuss whatever you need." The rest of the teachers exchanged uneasy glances as they watched Ms. Harper follow Mr. Davis out of the auditorium. The students, still seated, whispered amongst themselves, wondering what had just happened. Lena's sudden exit had left a lingering tension in the air, but now there was something else, a sense that justice was about to be served. In the principal's office, the air was thick with unspoken words. Ms. Harper sat stiffly in a chair across from Mr. Davis's desk, her back straight, her hands resting tightly on her lap. She tried to maintain her composure, but inside, she felt a rising sense of dread. She hadn't expected to be called out so directly, and certainly not by the father of the very student she had been bullying. Mr. Davis sat down behind his desk, his face unreadable. For a moment, he said nothing, simply letting the silence stretch between them. It wasn't until Ms. Harper shifted uncomfortably in her seat that he finally spoke. "Ms. Harper," he began, his voice controlled but intense, "I've been hearing things about your behavior in the classroom. Things that deeply concern me." Ms. Harper's face twitched. "I assure you, Mr. Davis, I run a very disciplined classroom. Some students," she hesitated, choosing her words carefully. "Some students simply need more structure than others. I don't believe in coddling them." Mr. Davis's eyes locked onto hers, and Ms. Harper faltered under his steady gaze. "Discipline is one thing," he said slowly, his voice measured. "But what I witnessed today, and what I've come to understand from other reports goes far beyond discipline. You've been singling out my daughter, Lena, humiliating her, mocking her, and that is something I cannot and will not tolerate in this school." Ms. Harper opened her mouth to protest, but Mr. Davis held up a hand, silencing her. "I am not interested in excuses," he said firmly. "This school is a place of learning, a place where every student, no matter their background, is to be treated with respect and dignity. What you did today, and what you've been doing for weeks now, is unacceptable. I don't know what personal issues you may be dealing with, but they are not an excuse for racism or bullying." Ms. Harper's face reddened, her hands gripping the arms of her chair tightly. She had expected to defend herself, to explain away her behavior, but Mr. Davis's calm yet commanding presence left no room for argument. I had no idea Lena was your daughter," Ms. Harper stammered, as if that fact somehow excused her behavior. Mr. Davis's eyes narrowed slightly. "And what difference would that have made?" he asked quietly. "Would you have treated her better if you knew she was my daughter? Or would you have found another black student to bully?" Ms. Harper's mouth opened, but no words came out. She hadn't expected him to see through her so easily. Mr. Davis stood up from his desk, his tall frame casting a shadow over the room. "Ms. Harper, you have crossed a line. There is no place for this kind of behavior in my school." The door to the office opened, and 2 school board members walked in, accompanied by Mrs. Davis. They had been briefed on the situation by Mr. Davis earlier, and they now took their seats in the office, ready to deal with the matter at hand. Mrs. Davis looked directly at Ms. Harper, her expression one of quiet strength. Though her anger simmered beneath the surface, she remained composed, letting her husband handle the formalities. "Ms. Harper," one of the board members began, flipping through a file of reports on his lap, "we've received numerous complaints about your behavior, and after what occurred today at the assembly, it is clear that disciplinary action must be taken." Ms. Harper's breath hitched, her face flushing with a mixture of fear and frustration. "Disciplinary action," she repeated, her voice trembling slightly. "I admit I may have been strict, but You've been far more than strict," the second board member interjected. "You've been abusive, discriminatory, and unprofessional. Your behavior has no place in this school, and frankly, it's a violation of our school's code of conduct." Ms. Harper clenched her fists, her mind racing. She hadn't expected things to escalate so quickly. She had thought she could control the situation, explain it away. But now, she was cornered. After reviewing the complaints and today's incident, the first board member continued, "We have decided that you will be suspended from your teaching duties for 6 months, effective immediately." Ms. Harper's eyes widened. 6 months, she gasped. "Yes," Mr. Davis confirmed, his voice steady. 6 months, without pay. During that time, you will be required to attend diversity training and counseling to address the issues that have led to this behavior. When you return, if you return, you will be under strict supervision. Any further incidents, and you will be terminated. Ms. Harper's face drained of color. She had known that consequences were coming, but the reality of the situation hit her like a wave. She was being disciplined, her reputation tarnished, her career on the line. She wanted to protest, to blame someone, anyone else, but deep down, she knew that she had brought this upon herself. I understand," she whispered, barely able to get the words out. The meeting was over. As Ms. Harper stood to leave, her shoulders slumped, she cast one last glance at Mr. Davis. But his face remained stern, unyielding. There was no sympathy there, no pity. Only the look of a man who had done what was necessary to protect his daughter and the students in his school. The following Monday, the air at the school felt lighter, as if a dark cloud had lifted. Lena had stayed home for the weekend, recovering from the emotional toll of Ms. Harper's bullying, but her father had made sure she knew that things were going to be different now. When she walked into the school that morning, she felt the stares of her classmates. But instead of judgment, there was something else in their eyes, respect, admiration even. Emily, the girl who had sat quietly in the class all those weeks, approached Lena with a shy smile. "Lena," Emily said, her voice soft but sincere, "I'm really sorry about everything that happened. I should have spoken up sooner. Ms. Harper was awful to you, and it wasn't fair." Lena smiled, her heart warming at the unexpected kindness. "Thank you, Emily. It means a lot." As Lena walked down the hallway, she passed the empty classroom that had once been Ms. Harper's. A substitute teacher was inside now, preparing for the day. Lena hesitated for a moment, staring at the room that had once been a place of fear and humiliation. But now, it was just another classroom. She took a deep breath and continued walking. Her father had been right. Things were different now. The weight that had once pressed down on her shoulders had been lifted, and she could finally breathe again. At lunch, Lena found herself sitting with new friends, including Emily. The students talked about their classes, their families, their dreams for the future. For the first time in weeks, Lena felt like she belonged, like she wasn't just surviving but thriving. Later that afternoon, Mr. Davis called a special meeting for the entire school staff. In that meeting, he announced the launch of a new diversity and inclusion program designed to ensure that every student, no matter their race or background, felt safe and valued. He spoke passionately about the importance of empathy, understanding, and respect, drawing on the experiences of the past few months as a reminder of what could happen when those values were forgotten. As the staff listened, they couldn't help but feel inspired by Mr. Davis's leadership and commitment to change. They knew that the school was entering a new chapter, one where the mistakes of the past would not be repeated. And as for Lena, she continued to grow stronger. She had faced the worst of Ms. Harper's cruelty and had come out the other side, not broken, but whole. She knew now that her voice mattered, that she had the power to stand up for herself and others. The future was bright, and Lena was ready to face it head-on, with the unwavering support of her family and the knowledge that no one could take away her worth.